The happy and the harsh reality of owning a commercial property when you've exchanged on it.
I'm the ringleader, so listen up.
It's Marky Mark.
Did that make sense what I just said?
I hope so. No, it did. I think anything that comes out of your mouth eventually does make sense.
Sort of get there in the end.
You get there in the end.
This is your baby topic. Tell us about it.
Okay, so life after buying a commercial property. I think, look, you're someone you're going through the processes. You know, it's been a bit of a ride, and you're there. You finally reach that point. You own it, and then you're like, wow, what do we do from here? And I think that there's a lot of realities that you've got to look at in a good sense and a not so much of a bad sense, but you know, it's looking at it. It's not always going to be sunshine and rainbows. Let's put it that way. Especially when we're looking at in the perspective of, are you going to wholeheartedly be managing this property yourself, or are you going to be looking for outside help and expertise?
Yep.
So for me, it's exploring, okay, for instance, if it is yourself that's going to be looking at it in the more so private sense, you're doing it yourself, we've got to look at that property as a whole and be like, what are the objectives? What's the goal here with this property? And does that mean, of course, are you looking to own or occupy it yourself? Or the other major question is, are you looking to have that property tenanted? And if so, what are we going to do to make that really attractive for a tenant moving in?
It's probably a bit of a no-brainer as an owner-occupier, isn't it? Like once you've purchased a property and you're an owner-occupier, probably a lot of the guesswork is out of it.
Yeah, I think so. I think, you know, leading up to the ultimate purchase of it all, you've done your fair share of due diligence. You know, you're fairly confident in the ins and outs of the property. So owner occupying it yourself, you've done all the hard work. You get in there, and I think if there's a few modifications to do here and there, you'll do those. I think the harder part is when you're looking to have it as an investment opportunity, should it not be already tenanted, then this is where you've obviously got to start exploring a little bit deeper as far as your knowledge of the property, your knowledge of the area per se, and what type of business can really maximize its value.
You know what I noticed? A lot of them are all the successful landlords that predominantly do commercial. None of them self-manage.
Nah, that's true. That's very true.
Resi sometimes, but certainly commercial, no chance. And I reckon a really good testament of that was COVID, because the amount of work that was generated out of COVID. Morning, Luke. The amount of work that was generated out of COVID with settling tenants down, negotiations, just going through that whole process, really put us property managers on a treadmill. And I think the value there for a landlord, commercial landlord, just phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal.
Absolutely. And I'm thinking,
but they don't get paid anymore.
No, that's right. You know, being someone like, you know, that does, for example, own commercial property, you know, you're not someone that I think in the most cases owns just the one. And, you know, for instances like last year and the year before, where there was, you know, truly difficult timeframes and periods for tenants and for owners, you know, having the expertise of someone like a commercial property manager, the time and effort it does take to actually look after the one asset, let alone hundreds, it really shows that it's something that needs to be explored. Even of course, even outside of COVID, for example, you know, there's a lot of things to take into account. You know, finding the right tenant isn't exactly, you know, the easiest of tasks. You know, screening the right tenant and ensuring that, you know, you've got someone that's going to be in place for a long time and will be, of course, paying the right amount of rent that'll suffice for the long term. You know, you need to be reaching out to the sort of people that'll help you or guide you in the right direction for that. Unless you're obviously extremely seasoned in that approach and you can do it yourself.
So let's do for people that are looking at buying commercial property. Yep. Today, this is the reality of what are the sort of highs and lows of owning a commercial property, can we, within 1 minute, go through the best points about owning a commercial property? Then we'll spend a minute going through the shit points about owning a commercial property. So let's just hit those targets. What's the great thing about owning a commercial property once you've purchased a commercial property?
I think the great thing about owning a commercial property, especially the number one, if it's got a quality tenant in place, you've got obviously accounting the rental return that you'll be achieving, so a good positive yield on the property. So I think that's definitely
better rental return.
Rental return. And I think, of course, if you've been smart enough about where you've purchased, it's how attractive the property is, for example. So, the look, the feel, ultimately, as much as the aesthetics. So I think that's definitely another one. A third one, as a pro, for example, it's not something that's longer tenant. You've obviously got a longer tenant in place. With residential, it's a bit different. It's more or less short term. So you do go through a bit more of a longer screening process, but it's for the long run. It's for the long haul. So definitely a longer tenant. And then I think
maintenance.
Maintenance, of course. It's one of those things you've got to explore. With being number 4, of course, in the positives.
It's more likely that your tenant's going to fix a washer in a commercial property than in a residential property.
Exactly.
So there's going to be they're generally going to look after. They're going to put their hand in their pocket. Also, I think improve the asset, whereas a residential is not going to improve an asset, and a residential tenant, a commercial tenant will. Number 4. So I think the commercial tenant improving the asset, they will do new ceilings, new walls, upgrade the air conditioning, new signage, new paint. They'll, because their brand often depends on it, or their company depends on how that looks, so they'll spend money on it. Next one.
And then I think
good things about owning after buying a commercial property is what we're talking about.
Good thing is, in most cases as well, is that your tenant in place will be covering the outgoing costs of the property. So, aside from all the additional things such as fit out and whatnot, they'll be covering those costs such as council, water, strata, for example, if it is a strata property, land tax, for example. So it's things that you don't have to worry about anymore. They get covered for you. So it's the beauty of sitting back and watching the property evolve and having all its things paid for on the side.
I've got another one. Built-in rental increases.
Oh, gotta love that. I think that's what it's all about.
So residential, you've got to write them a letter. You got to give them 2 or 3 months notice. Commercial, it's factored into the lease.
Factored into lease, and it can be factored in multiple ways, but in most common times and practices, of course, it's fixed increases. So, for example, if you're locked in for a 3-year lease or a 5-year lease, and you've popped in 3 or 4% increases throughout every renewal period there, it'll increase by that said percentage, which is obviously extremely advantageous for a property owner.
Anything else on positives that we've missed?
Oh, I think they're the most crucial ones. Those are a good 5 or 6 that we popped in there.
That's them. And the negatives?
Oh, the negatives. I mean, look, if for example, if you're obviously privately managing this, it does take a lot of time and effort, especially when things start to go wrong, i.e. maintenance. So I know we spoke as maintenance.
So you reckon overall it's a harder managed asset to manage than a residential asset?
Look, I feel like it can be, despite the fact that you do live in a residential property, it does get a bit more wear and tear. But the bigger, for example, a commercial property is, I think the harder it is to maintain. It's not so easy. Yep. If it's something small, I think, different story. But the bigger, the harder.
More cogs. I think the most scary thing, after purchasing a commercial property is vacancy. That's the thing that freaks me out the most.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's number 2 in the negatives. There's properties, for example, that can sit on the market for an extended period of time. I think you can feel fairly confident that at one stage you've happily got a tenant. But in some cases, like with COVID, for example, you're treading a little bit on water. It was a matter of, you've got your tenants asking for rental reduction. And even if you didn't want to explore that or honor that, they had the possibility of walking. And that's a scary fact. But that can just even happen at any time, really, aside from COVID.
Well, if you look at how the government treated commercial landlords as opposed to residential landlords, I think they got slapped around a little bit more through COVID. Yeah. For whatever reason, the commercial landlord was regarded as probably more that they could. I guess they could be slapped around a little bit more for. I just don't know why. Other negatives for owning a commercial property once you've purchased a commercial property?
Okay, negotiating a lease can be a bit of a daunting task. It's not an easy thing because a residential lease is pretty straightforward. Whereas a commercial, there are a lot of variables to go through, and those variables, depending on what they are, could be an extreme high for you or extreme low for one, and you don't want to lock yourself into something that's going to put you in a bit of a black hole for the next set amount of years. But it can be a big negative is negotiating the actual lease.
Yeah. So I guess the variables inside of that are just and not only that, but if you're a landlord and you haven't actually tracked those variables, I think you can actually lose money. A lot of landlords that are very good commercial landlords have their head around every single touch point on that lease, on that property, and they will bury or they will surface those things in the negotiation very cleverly. There's one particular gentleman in mind. I think you got the same guy in mind. That whenever we're negotiating, he's negotiating a lease with his tenants, and we're negotiating on his behalf. The stuff he comes up with and the ups and downs he comes up with, you're like, how do you think of that? And it's pure genius.
Yeah, and seeing a heads of agreement, being drafted to such detail. I mean, that I know we've spoken about this before. What a kick you get out of reading something like that, because there's not anything that's looked over. Everything is accountable. So, but again, if you're not seasoned in that sense, good luck. Can be extremely big negative.
Yep. Even fire services and air conditioning and all that sort of stuff. It's really, really important. So, man, I think that's a show. Is there any other negatives we got? If anyone's just tuned in, we're doing the positives and negatives after buying commercial property. We've just gone through the positives. Any other negatives?
Look, negatives, of course, are overlooking, the due diligence period, overlooking the fact of the age of the asset, for example. You could have been fairly confident that despite its age, it's soundproof, it's good, it's been doing well, it's had a track record of having really good quality tenants. But the negative of it all is you just don't know. You just don't know which way it can ultimately go. And therefore, that's just the risk one takes, but it can be an extreme negative in the commercial world.
Another aspect, guys and girls that are watching, when you're considering buying commercial property, life after buying the commercial property, you've got a lesser selection of banks and bankers that can actually fund the property. So the conventional banker that you would go to do a loan, like a broker, will often say, sorry, I don't do commercial loans. So I think your selection of banks is less. Your interest rate is higher by 1 to 1.5%. So if your variables are sitting for resi sitting at 3, your commercial rate's often sitting at 4.5. So it's 1 to 1.5% higher. And the securitization for the asset that you need. So normally before you get into mortgage insurance on residential, you need to have a 20% security. But with commercial, it's a 30 to 35% security. And I'm even seeing banks overarching on that now a little bit more. So you do need a little bit more equity or cash in the bank when you're buying a commercial property funding wise.
Very true. Very true. Sensei Saturday. I think it's a wrap.
It's a wrap. It's definitely a wrap.
Excellent.
Mate, have a great day. Anything on the cards for today? Exciting. You got Eleanor's cooking away. You're about to exchange that.
Eleanor's cooking away. I got French's Forest on the stove, for example. 3 Mitchell Road, Brookvale, an incredible site for lease in Brookie. It's surrounded by some incredible businesses, i.e. McDonald. That's in the oven right now. So we've got a few things going on. Fun time.
Deal. And it's the Queen's birthday.
That's right. Everybody have a happy long weekend, but stay safe out there. And of course, double demerit points on the road. So be mindful of that.
Watch out for it. See you, legend.
Bye.